is the other thing. You got to remember that for a lot of classes, graduate students are the teaching assistants doing things here, and they also need to remember that free speech and viewpoint diversity does kind of matter. Alrighty, so one of the things I like to keep track of with respect to universities is the surveys around free speech, free expression, and the campus climate. Why, of course, because universities are where we train the next generation of scientists, so it kind of does matter. And the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, alongside the College Pulse, have just released their 2025 college free speech rankings, which the survey is always named for the current graduating class, and that's the current class we're on, is the class of 2025, and we'll be graduating this academic year in May of 2025. So it only makes sense to be talking about that. That's not the right way to say it. Their free speech rankings the year is based upon the graduating class of the academic year that we are currently on, in which the survey is released. And this is the start of the 2024-2025 academic year. Graduating class of 2025 will walk in May of 2025 for most universities anyway. But here's the press release, and then I will show you guys some of the highlights with the survey results. One of the reasons I actually like exploring this survey a lot is they actually did a great job with a sort of online sort of toolkit that you can thusly explore some of the comments. There's some interesting trends that I noticed, and I think it had a little bit to do of probably when the timing of the survey was done. So it's curious that way for sure. So from the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, or FIRE, 2025 college free speech rankings expose threats to First Amendment rights on campus. University of Virginia takes the top spot, while Harvard, Columbia, and NYU share an abysmal free speech status. Harvard is still ranked on the bottom. Last year it was too. 55% of students find it difficult to discuss the Israeli-Palestinian conflict on campus, the highest ever recorded on any issue. If you notice, I think I talked about it really briefly a while back, but there's some pretty contentious arguments around the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. There are protests. There also have been riots and vandalization and all of those kinds of things, none of which are appropriate on a university campus, regardless of the topic in question, over which there's consternation. So, just to make that point, none of that is ever appropriate and doesn't fall within the bounds of free speech to engage in vandalism, to prevent students from walking around campus for any reason, to harass students for any reason, regardless of what side of the argumentation you fall on. So, just to make that point. This year's college free speech rankings released today, this is dated September 5th, by the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression and the College Pulse, offer comprehensive insights into the state of free speech on America's college campuses. The largest report of its kind, the rankings draw from more than 58,000 student responses representing more than 250 colleges and universities nationwide. The report arrives at a time when protest over the Israel-Hamas war has put campus speech concerns at the forefront of the national conversation for nearly a year. These rankings highlight a pivotal moment in higher education where the tension between maintaining a free speech environment and navigating deeply polarizing issues is more pronounced than ever, said FIRE CEO Greg Lukianoff. Quote, the Middle East crisis plunged campuses into absolute chaos last academic year, and administrators largely failed in their response, clamping down on free speech protections instead of fostering spaces for open dialogue, Lukianoff added. The nightmare scenarios of last spring cannot be repeated this fall. I'm sorry, but if you're watching the news, that's kind of already started happening. But anyway, particularly for Columbia, I believe. Colleges need to reassert their mantle of being marketplaces of ideas, not bubbles of groupthink and censorship. The best colleges for free speech are University of Virginia coming in number 1. Michigan Technical University was number 1 last year. Florida State University, Eastern Kentucky University, Georgia Institute of Technology, Claremont McKenna College, North Carolina State University, Oregon State University, University of North Carolina, Charlotte, Mississippi State University. The worst colleges for free speech: Pomona College, Indiana University, University of Texas, Austin, University of Southern California. Oh, I think that's Anna Kralov's institution, if I remember correctly, but I could be wrong. Syracuse University, Barnard College, University of Pennsylvania, New York University, Columbia University, Harvard University, Harvard being dead last. For the first time, the University of Virginia has claimed the top spot in the rankings, followed closely by Michigan Technical University, which came in first last year, and Florida State University in third. Eastern Kentucky University and Georgia Tech round out the top 5. Speech controversies at these schools are rare, and when they do happen, expression is more likely to be defended by the administration than punished. All of these schools also have green light rankings from FIRE for their free speech policies, talking about the top 5, I believe. Their students seem to notice, as all of them have considerably higher levels of administrative support for free speech than schools ranking in the bottom 5. Harvard retained its position as the lowest-ranked institution for free speech for the second consecutive year. Harvard, Columbia University, and New York University all received an abysmal rating for their speech climates. The University of Pennsylvania and Barnard College round out the bottom 5. Now, I will make a note. Actually, University of Pennsylvania, otherwise known as Penn, in just common lexicon, actually was the second worst last year, and seems to have climbed up just a teeny bit up the rankings. They don't have a score of 0, I don't think. But I'll have to look at it again. I did preview some of the rankings before recording this video, so it's it's interesting. These schools not only have low levels of administrative support for free speech, they also have a low level of student comfort in expressing their views on controversial political topics and a strong bias in favor of allowing liberal speakers on campus over conservative ones. Quote, "The lack of administrative support for free speech trickles down into student behavior," said FIRE Vice President of Research Angela Erickson. "How many more students will be blocked from attending speeches? How many more speakers will be shouted down or even attacked? These aren't just statistics. We've seen the names and faces of people who are hurt when a campus is hostile to free speech." FIRE also released a supplementary report examining the impact of this year's encampment protests. Sorry, you don't necessarily have the right to take over a whole space of campus, but that's a whole other argument we could have another day, so I'm not going to dwell on that. According to the encampment report, 15% of students said they feel very or somewhat unsafe on their campus right now, and 37% of students said the police response to encampments on campuses across the country makes them feel very or somewhat unsafe on their own campuses. Notice that the majority aren't in that category. Might be a little or not a little or I feel perfectly safe kind of thing. Key findings from the rankings report include 52% of students reported that blocking other students from attending a campus speech is at least rarely acceptable, up from 45% last year and 37% 2 years ago. Even more concerning is that 32% reported that using violence to stop a campus speech is at least rarely acceptable, up from 27% last year and 20% 2 years ago. Which is to say they're having more students saying that they think it's at least to some degree acceptable to do these things, which, no, it's not ever acceptable. 69% said that it is at least rarely acceptable for other students to shout down a speaker, up from 63% last year. No, it is not. 55% of students find it difficult to discuss the Israeli-Palestinian conflict on campus. This is a record high for any issue since the rankings began. 42% of students believe that it is only somewhat clear that their administration protects free speech, while 24% believe it is not at all or not very clear. So what's in the middle? The don't knows, I guess? Additionally, 47% of students believe their administration would only be somewhat likely to defend a speaker's right during a controversy, while 28% believe their administration would be not at all or not very likely to do so. This year, 17% of students said they feel they cannot express their opinion on a subject because of how students, a professor, or the administration would respond. This is a bit of positive news, since last year the percentage was 20% and in 2022 it was 22%. Very conservative students reported self-censoring most often. With 34%, they do so very or fairly often. 24% of somewhat conservative students reported self-censoring very or fairly often, as did 22% of slightly conservative students. In contrast, only 15% of very liberal students reported self-censoring fairly often, very or fairly often, 12% of somewhat liberal students, and 13% of slightly liberal students, and 17% of moderate students said the same. Quote, while it is encouraging to see some progress in reducing student self-censorship, the persistence of deplatformings and challenges posed by the Middle East conflict underscore the need for continued vigilance in protecting free expression on campus, Fire Chief Research Advisor Sean Stevens. Some of the nation's most lauded higher ed institutions are failing miserably in upholding First Amendment protections, Stevens continued. Often these schools set the tone for the wider higher ed ecosystem, so it is imperative they address these issues, lest this failure drag the rights of a whole new generation of students down with it. Yes, I very much agree with that sentiment. So let us flip over to the actual rankings themselves here. So this is obviously this will all be linked in the description for you. So I encourage you to go explore. Go see if there's a school in particular that you like here. There's actually a lot of well-known schools that end up here on the list. So like I said, they focus on the well-known schools because it tends to affect the rest of the higher ed ecosystem, which I can understand that. That actually makes a decent amount of sense. So let's see here. This is University of Virginia, which is the top spot here. 78% say shouting down a speaker to prevent them from speaking on campus is at least rarely acceptable, which is actually kind of concerning. 34% say using violence to stop someone from speaking. Again, it's not acceptable at all. Never, ever, ever. For every one conservative student, they have roughly 3 liberal students. 47% of students say they self-censor on campus at least once or twice a month. What I always find interesting about these is one of the things they ask is for students to, write in their own words when about a moment they felt they couldn't share their own opinions. And obviously this is cleaned up so you really can't necessarily tell who the student is. Per the ethics involved with human subjects research, they have to do that. Understandably so. So there is some interesting things in here that you can see just for the University of Virginia. And you see some comments that from the student body, which is always interesting to have a look at. Some professors seem to show very strong personal opinions, and this causes students to think twice before presenting opinions. Just in general, I often have views that I find to be slightly less inflamed and hot-headed than many other students. And considering how many people are treated simply because their views on issues such as the Israeli conflict, I wouldn't be comfortable saying anything about that one. That didn't quite come out right. So, some other options. Sometimes with other students, I feel issues of being able to voice my opinions or even exist in fear that I may be harmed or harassed for it. Although it's not with people that I'm typically around, I've been in a few stressful situations. So that's just for the University of Virginia, which is sort of very top spot. If we go all the way down to the very end here, which these are some of the warning schools, but in the main list, as it were, Harvard University still remains pretty dang abysmal. In here, going down to the student voices. Even mentioning being a part of our campus's only conservative newspaper was enough for other peers in my dorm to send verbal threats in the dorm group chat. That's not appropriate at all, and I hope somebody's helping you out with getting disciplinary action for those students who are threatening and harassing you. Just to know. During a class about pregnancy, the teaching fellow allowed students to openly mock Christian anti-abortion stances. If I were to respond or even to say that protecting human life is important, both the teaching fellow and the students would have cried foul. I have learned that I am expected to take insults on the chin and say nothing. I dare not challenge a graduate student who chooses my grade. This is the other thing. You got to remember that for a lot of classes, graduate students are the teaching assistants doing things here, and they also need to remember that, free speech and viewpoint diversity does kind of matter. on this. It's not necessarily appropriate to lead a whole group of other students in harassing or, well, not harassing, but mocking other students based upon their opinions and those kinds of things. Just to know. So that's Harvard in here with some of their students' thoughts in here, and it's good to go explore and see what you think, because there's a lot of schools in here, including a lot of the flagships in major states that you can find across in here, be it, you know, Knox College, Iowa State University, University of Texas, San Antonio, all of those different schools are in here, and so I encourage you to go explore. It's a pretty interesting read, but it is really concerning to me that the numbers of students who think it's okay to shout down a speaker, to use violence to stop a speaker, is growing in the rarely acceptable, because the reason they highlight the rarely acceptable number, you know, at least rarely acceptable, is because that's the kind of, the way the scale goes with it. It goes from never acceptable to rarely acceptable to somewhat to something like always or something like that. So if you're saying at least 37% acceptable, well, there's some students in there then who are going to say that it's always acceptable to shout down a speaker. It's always acceptable to use violence to stop a speaker. There's some students that are saying that. I am not. I'm totally against that. That's inappropriate and wrong. But it is concerning what they say in here, that students, the number with students has gone up, that more than half of students are starting to say that. So this is a very, very concerning thing to see. And so it says to me that something's still not quite right and needs to be addressed with that. But have a look, explore the free speech rankings, and let me know what you think. Hit the like button on the way out the door, comment the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel, all that good jazz. Until next time, I'm Adrian. May you stay curious.